In this lecture, we are continuing our project of building an NFT minting Dapp with Truffle, Solidity, OpenZeppelin, and React. Before we jump into this video, check out our Kickstarter that's happening now, Hello Coding 4.0. You can pledge and get tons of content all about blockchain and more. Previously, we built a React project with Truffle as well, and we built a smart contract for minting NFTs, and we initialized Web3 in the front end. In this lecture, we're going to deploy our smart contract in order to get the contract address and the contract ABI, which is required if we want to interact with the contract via the website, because the website needs to know what contract you're interacting with. So let's go ahead and deploy our smart contract, the color token.solidity. We have to build a deployment script which goes into migrations. Currently, we have one file inside of migrations called initial migration, which deploys the default Solidity contract. So here inside of migrations, we're going to create a new file called deploy contracts.js. And you can be more specific than that if you'd like. Here we're going to create a const called color token and take artifacts.require to require our color token contract. And this is why it's useful to have the file name and the contract name the same so you don't get confused. Then we'll call module.exports and use a function deployer and call the deployer.deploy to deploy the color token. Just make sure you pass in the constant, not a string. So this is exactly like the initial migration, but it's just for the color token instead. So that is the deployment script. Now we can go into our terminal or command line and we can call the file Truffle migrate. We can call the command Truffle migrate, and we just have to make sure that our compiler version matches the file version. So if you get this message that Truffle is currently using Solidity compiler 0.8.10, but one or more of your contracts specify Pragma Solidity 0.8.11, this means that you have to update your Truffle configuration. And so we're going to go into our code editor and pop open truffleconfig.js. Here you can set the Solidity compiler version to match what you have in your smart contract. So you can also use a range for the Solidity version. You don't have to specify a minimum like this, but usually that is how it's done, with either a range or with a minimum. Then you can call Truffle migrate again, and this time, as long as your Solidity compiler version matches the Solidity version mentioned in your contract, then you'll be able to call Truffle migrate. Okay, so this time we can actually compile our contracts, which is the first step of Truffle migrate. So we're compiling a bunch of contracts, but you'll get a message that something went wrong while attempting to connect to the network at localhost port 7545. Could not connect to your Ethereum client. So what we need to do is open up Ganache and keep Ganache running, because Ganache is going to host the local blockchain. So without Ganache running, we get this error message. That's why we need to have a local blockchain running. So here, Ganache is opening for me. And as long as I keep Ganache open, then I'll be able to connect to an Ethereum client, because that's what Ganache is for. It's to act as our Ethereum client in this project. And why are we using Ganache? Well, because that's the default. If you go into Truffle config, you can see networks. And by default, we're using localhost at a standard port. Okay, so we're going to go into Ganache and select Quick Start to launch a local blockchain. So as long as you just have this app open, then you can go into the terminal and call Truffle migrate. And there we go. Now we are seeing some action. So now we compile our contracts and we can start migrations. So it's a two-step process of Truffle migrate. First, the contracts are compiled, so they go through that Solidity compiler. Then migrations are begun. We're using the Ganache network. You can use a different network. You just have to specify that in Truffle config. We run the first script, initial migration, to deploy the migrations contract. Then we run our second script, which we built ourselves, which deploys the color token. Awesome. So you can see the total deployment is 2 and final cost. And don't worry, it's not real ETH. This is ETH used by Ganache, which means it's just using your dummy ETH right here in your account. So keep Ganache open. Now we can see we have deployed color token and we have a contract address. So you want to copy that contract address and paste it into your app.js file where you instantiate a new contract. Because that contract address, that is how you can reference that contract that you just deployed out. And you have to make sure it is the latest version of your contract. If you, for example, close Ganache and then you try to use this again, well, you may have to redeploy the contract again and get an updated address. Okay, so now also we have ABI, which actually now has appeared. So inside of our source folder, we now have an artifacts folder and then contracts, and we have a whole bunch of JSON files here. That's because these are all the files that our contracts use. So remember, we had colortoken.json, which is a representation of colortoken.solidity. But then color token is coming from a parent, the ERC721, so there's JSON file for that. But then this file also uses other files, so therefore we have a whole bunch of JSON helper files. All right, so that is how you can deploy a smart contract. So now we're able to get the contract ABI and the contract address. Our next step of the project is going to be to build the front-end NFT minting functionality in React and JavaScript. So don't miss the next lecture. Don't forget to check out our Kickstarter, Hello Coding 4.0, first link in the description.